Three men. A locked lighthouse. A meal still on the table. In 1900, something took the keepers of Eilean Moor, and a newly discovered log entry changes everything we thought we knew about what happened on that rock. Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing at the bow of a relief vessel. It is the day after Christmas, 1900. The Scottish winter has turned the Atlantic into a churning grey wasteland, and your ship, the Hesperus, is cutting through swells toward a cluster of uninhabited islands known as the Seven Hunters. They rise from the ocean like broken teeth, jagged and ancient, older than recorded history. The largest of them is Eilean Moor. And perched on its highest cliff, nearly 400 feet above the waterline, sits a lighthouse. It has been dark for 11 days. The Northern Lighthouse Board has received no communication from the three keepers stationed there. Passing ships have reported the light extinguished since December 15th. And now you are part of the crew sent to find out why. As the Hesperus approaches the island's east landing platform, you notice something wrong immediately. No one is there to greet you. Protocol demands that when a relief vessel approaches, the duty keeper must be at the landing to assist with mooring and supply transfer. But the platform is empty. The flagpole is bare. No signal. No movement. Nothing but the wind and the sound of waves striking rock. A man named Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, the one sent to replace whoever's shift had ended, climbs the narrow stone steps carved into the cliff face. 160 steps from the landing platform to the lighthouse compound. He later described those steps as the longest walk of his life. And when he reached the top, when he pushed open the entrance gate and called out into the compound, his voice came back to him unanswered. The lighthouse was empty. Not ransacked. Not destroyed. Not burned or flooded or damaged. Empty. As if the three men who lived and worked inside it had simply ceased to exist. And here is where the story becomes something else entirely. Because what Joseph Moore found inside that lighthouse has haunted investigators, historians, and theorists for more than 120 years. And what was recently discovered in a previously overlooked logbook entry suggests that the keepers may have witnessed something in the days before their disappearance, something that, to this day, no one has been able to explain. This is the mystery of the Flannan Isles. And I need you to stay with me. Because the deeper we go into this, the less sense it makes. Let's set the stage properly. Because you cannot understand what happened on Eilean Moor without understanding what kind of place it is. The Flannan Isles sit roughly 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis in Scotland's Outer Hebrides. They are among the most remote and inhospitable landmasses in the British Isles. There are 7 main islands in the group, none of them inhabited. Sailors had avoided them for centuries. Local folklore held that the islands were haunted, that small creatures, spirits of the dead, wandered the ruins of an ancient chapel on Eilean Moor built by Saint Flannan himself. Shepherds from Lewis who occasionally brought their sheep to graze on the islands refused to spend the night. They would not use the word island while they were there, or refer to common objects by their usual names. The Flannan Isles had their own language of avoidance, as if speaking directly about the place might draw its attention. Into this landscape of superstition and isolation, the Northern Lighthouse Board built a lighthouse. Construction began in 1895 and was completed in 1899. The light was first lit on December 7, 1899, almost exactly 1 year before the keepers vanished. The tower stood 75 feet tall, with a revolving light visible for 24 nautical miles. It was automated by clockwork, wound by the keepers, and required constant maintenance. 3 keepers were assigned to the station at all times. They worked in rotation, 2 weeks on the island, 1 week on the mainland. The posting was considered arduous but manageable. The men selected for Eilean Moor were experienced. They knew isolation. They knew the sea. The 3 men on duty in December 1900 were Thomas Marshall, the first assistant keeper, age 28. James Duckett, the principal keeper, age 43, a veteran of 20 years in the lighthouse service. And Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper, filling in for the regular third man who was on leave. MacArthur was reportedly a large, physically powerful man, but known to be moody and temperamental. These were not inexperienced men. These were not tourists. They knew that island, they knew those waters, and they knew the protocols that governed every aspect of Lighthouse operation. And yet, between December 15th and December 26th, 1900, all three of them vanished from the face of the earth. Now, I mentioned that Joseph Moore was the first to enter the lighthouse. Let me walk you through precisely what he found, because the details matter. Every single one of them. He entered through the main door, which was unlocked. The kitchen was on the ground floor. Inside, he found a meal. Accounts vary on whether it was a full prepared meal or partially eaten food, but the consistent detail is that there was an untouched plate of meat, potatoes, and pickles. The chair at one end of the table had been knocked over, or pushed back as if someone had risen suddenly. The clock on the wall had stopped. The fire in the grate had not been tended and was long dead. Upstairs, the beds were empty. In the sleeping quarters, the beds had been made. No signs of struggle. No blood. No notes left behind. The logbooks were in order, almost. The last entry in the lighthouse log was dated December 15, 1900. It was written by Thomas Marshall. And here is the first of 5 things that no one, not the Northern Lighthouse Board, not the investigators, not the historians who have studied this case for over a century, has ever been able to satisfactorily explain. 1. The oilskins. There were 3 sets of waterproof oilskin coats at the lighthouse, one for each keeper. 2 sets were missing from the hooks by the door. 1 set remained. This meant that 2 of the 3 men had put on their weather gear before leaving the lighthouse. But the third man, and based on which coat remained, it was Donald MacArthur, had gone outside without his. In December. On a Scottish island in the North Atlantic. No keeper would voluntarily go outside in those conditions without protective clothing unless something had compelled him to leave in extreme haste. What could make a man run into a December Atlantic storm without his coat? 2. The entrance gate. The gate to the lighthouse compound was closed. If the men had left in a panic, it seems unlikely they would have stopped to close and latch the gate behind them. But it was shut. This suggests either that at least one man left calmly enough to secure the gate, or that someone, or something, closed it after them. 3. The West Landing Platform. Eileen Moore has 2 landing platforms, one on the east, one on the west. The east platform was sheltered and used during normal operations. The west platform was exposed to the full force of the Atlantic and was only used when easterly winds made the other platform dangerous. When investigators examined the west landing, they found significant damage. The iron railings had been bent. A life buoy and its moorings had been torn from their fixings. A large stone block, estimated at over a ton, had been displaced from its position above the platform. Ropes from a supply crane had been pulled from their storage box, which was 70 feet above sea level, and were found tangled and strewn about. But here is the critical detail: the damage was recent, consistent with the time frame of the disappearance. Whatever had struck the west landing had done so with extraordinary force. And yet, and this is the part that makes your skin crawl, the weather reports from the surrounding area for the week of December 8th through December 15th showed no storms of sufficient magnitude to cause that kind of damage. 4. The log entries. Thomas Marshall's log entries from the days preceding the disappearance are, to put it mildly, unusual. On December 12th, he recorded severe winds and heavy seas. He noted that James Duckett had been quiet and that Donald MacArthur had been crying. On December 13th, the storm was noted as continuing, with all 3 men praying. Marshall wrote that the storm was the worst he had ever experienced. On December 14th, the storm reportedly ended, and Marshall noted that the weather had calmed. On December 15th, the final entry, Marshall wrote simply that conditions were calm, and that the sea was gray. Now, the authenticity and exact wording of these log entries has been debated by historians. Some scholars believe the entries were embellished or even fabricated by later writers for dramatic effect. But the core content, that something atmospheric and deeply unsettling was happening in the days before the disappearance, has been consistently attested to by multiple sources who examined the original logs before they were lost. And that brings us to number 5. The thing that has kept this case alive for over 120 years. The thing that separates Flannan Isles from a simple tragedy of the sea. 5. The weather discrepancy. The storms described in Marshall's log did not happen. At least, not according to any weather station in the Outer Hebrides, not according to any ship's log from vessels passing through the region that week, and not according to the meteorological records maintained by the Board of Trade. The week of December 12th through 15th was, by all available evidence, relatively calm in the waters surrounding the Flannan Isles. Winds were moderate. Seas were unremarkable. No storm was recorded. So either Thomas Marshall was lying, or he was experiencing something that the rest of the world was not. Let that settle for a moment. Because it is into this exact gap, between what was recorded inside the lighthouse and what was observed everywhere else, that a new discovery has recently been made. In 2023, a Scottish maritime historian, whose work has focused on Northern Lighthouse Board operations in the late Victorian and Edwardian period, announced the discovery of what appears to be a previously overlooked fourth log entry and a series of correspondence between the lighthouse keepers and the board's superintendent that had been misfiled in an unrelated archival collection. The historian, who has presented findings to the Scottish Maritime Heritage Association, has been cautious about making definitive claims, but the implications of what was found are staggering. The fourth log entry, if authenticated, was written in what appears to be Thomas Marshall's hand, and is dated December 15, 1900, the same date as the previously known final entry. But this entry was found on a loose page, not in the bound logbook. It describes what Marshall calls unusual wave behavior in the waters surrounding the West Landing platform. Specifically, he describes waves that appeared to be moving against the prevailing current and wind direction. He describes the sea surface as rising and falling without rhythm in a localized area near the base of the cliffs. He uses the phrase, "the water was breathing." The water was breathing. Read that again. A trained, experienced lighthouse keeper, a man whose entire professional life revolved around observing and recording maritime conditions, looked at the ocean and wrote that it was breathing. The correspondence recovered alongside this entry includes a letter apparently drafted by James Duckett, the principal keeper, intended for the superintendent at the Breskleet Shore Station on Lewis. In it, Duckett reports that the keepers have observed sea behavior for which I have no explanation and which I have not seen in my 20 years of service. He requests that the next relief vessel bring a barometer, as the one at the station appears to be malfunctioning. It is showing pressure readings that fluctuate wildly within minutes, which Duckett attributes to instrument failure. But here is the thing. The Flannan Isles lighthouse was equipped with a high-quality mercury barometer, a robust instrument not prone to rapid fluctuation. If the barometer was functioning correctly, then what it was recording, sudden, violent changes in atmospheric pressure, would be consistent with a localized meteorological phenomenon of extraordinary intensity. Something happening on or very near Eilean Moor that was not affecting the surrounding region. A pressure anomaly. Invisible to every weather station. Felt by no passing ships. But hammering the instruments and the men inside that lighthouse for days. Now, I want to be clear about something. The 2023 discovery has not been universally accepted by historians. The documents are undergoing further analysis, and their provenance, the chain of custody from 1900 to their rediscovery in a misfiled collection, leaves room for skepticism. But the maritime historian who found them has noted that the paper, ink, and handwriting are consistent with early 1900s Lighthouse Board documents, and that the misfiling is consistent with known administrative chaos during the board's restructuring in the early 20th century. If these documents are genuine, they change the narrative significantly. They suggest that the keepers were not caught off guard by a single catastrophic event. They were enduring something over the course of multiple days. Something they could see, something their instruments could detect, but something they could not understand. And they were afraid. Duckett's letter, Marshall's log, these are not the words of men going about their routine. These are the words of men who have encountered something outside their frame of reference and are struggling to articulate it. Let me take you deeper. Because the official investigation, conducted by the Northern Lighthouse Board in early 1901, arrived at a conclusion that, even at the time, struck many as insufficient. Robert Muirhead, the superintendent who led the investigation, concluded that the three keepers had gone to the West Landing platform, likely to secure equipment that had been damaged or endangered by heavy seas. He theorized that a sudden, massive wave, what we might now call a rogue wave, had swept all three men into the ocean. He acknowledged that this explanation required one of the men, MacArthur, to have left the lighthouse without his oilskins, which he attributed to the urgency of the situation. MacArthur, Muirhead suggested, had seen something from the lighthouse window, perhaps Duckett and Marshall in danger, and had rushed out without stopping to put on his coat. It is a reasonable theory. Rogue waves are real. They can appear without warning, and they can reach heights of 30 meters or more. A wave of that size striking the West Landing platform of Eilean Mor could absolutely have swept men into the sea. The damaged railings, the displaced stone block, the tangled ropes, all of this is consistent with an enormous wave impact. But this theory has problems. Serious problems. First, the timing. If the men went to the West Landing to secure equipment, they would have done so during daylight hours. The light was last seen by a passing steamer, the Arch Tor, on the night of December 15th. Some accounts say December 14th. But the log's final entry is dated the 15th, with conditions described as calm. If the weather was calm on December 15th, why would the men have gone to the West Landing to secure equipment against heavy seas? Either the calm conditions described in the log were inaccurate, or the men went to the West Landing for a different reason. Second, the logistics. Three experienced keepers would not all leave the lighthouse at the same time. Standing orders explicitly prohibited this. At least one man was required to remain inside at all times to tend the light. For all three to have left simultaneously, something would have had to override their training, their discipline, and their professional instincts. Something urgent enough to make all three men abandon their post. Third, and most troublingly, the meal. The food on the table. If the men had left to secure equipment, even in haste, the scenario implies a sudden but comprehensible emergency. Ropes are loose, the crane is in danger, we need to go secure it before the next wave hits. That is an emergency, yes, but it is the kind of emergency lighthouse keepers train for. You would expect one man to stay behind. You would expect the others to suit up properly. You would not expect a man to abandon his meal and run out into a December storm without his coat unless something about the situation was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Unless what he saw from the window was not a loose rope. Unless it was something else. And this is where the new evidence intersects with the old mystery in a way that I find genuinely unsettling. If Marshall's loose page log entry is real, if the keepers had been observing anomalous wave behavior for days, if their barometer was recording impossible pressure fluctuations, if the sea itself was behaving in ways that defied their experience, then the scenario shifts. You are no longer looking at three men caught off guard by a rogue wave. You are looking at three men who have been watching something build over the course of days. Something they could not explain. Something that frightened them enough to make a grown man cry, to make seasoned professionals pray, to make the principal keeper draft a letter requesting help. And then, on December 15th, after the log recorded calm conditions, something changed. Something drew them, or drove them, to the West Landing platform. Two of them had time to put on their oilskins. The third did not. The gate was closed behind them. And then they were gone. I want you to hold that image in your mind. The closed gate. The cold meal. The stopped clock. And I want you to consider the theories that have been proposed over the last century, because each one reveals something not just about the mystery, but about what we are willing to believe. The first and most prosaic theory is the one I have already described, the rogue wave. It remains the official explanation and is favored by most mainstream historians. Its strengths are that it requires no supernatural element, it is consistent with the physical evidence at the West Landing, and rogue waves are well-documented phenomena. Its weaknesses are the weather discrepancy, the violation of standing orders, and the question of why all three men left simultaneously. If the new log entry is authentic, the rogue wave theory must also account for days of anomalous sea behavior preceding the event, which complicates the narrative of a sudden, isolated wave. The second theory is murder. Specifically, that one of the keepers, usually Donald MacArthur, due to his documented temperament, killed the other two and then either committed suicide by throwing himself into the sea or fled the island. This theory accounts for MacArthur's missing oilskins, the overturned chair, and the abandoned meal. However, there was no blood found anywhere in the lighthouse or on the surrounding rocks. No weapon. No signs of struggle beyond a single overturned chair. And MacArthur's body, like those of the other two, was never found. Furthermore, escape from Eilean Mor without a boat is effectively impossible. The relief vessel was the only regular contact, and no unauthorized boats were reported in the area. The third theory involves a psychological breakdown, a folie à trois, or shared psychosis. The isolation of lighthouse duty is well documented as a risk factor for mental illness. The theory suggests that the prolonged exposure to the dark, the storms, the confinement, and perhaps the superstitious atmosphere of the Flannan Isles could have induced a shared delusion among the three men, leading them to leave the lighthouse in a state of collective madness and perish in the sea. This theory has gained some traction in light of Marshall's log entries, which describe behavior consistent with extreme psychological distress. If the keepers were experiencing a shared breakdown, the anomalous log entries, the storms that never happened, the breathing sea, could be symptoms of their deteriorating mental state rather than observations of real phenomena. But this theory runs into its own problems. The physical damage at the West Landing was real. The bent railings, the displaced stone block, these were not hallucinations. Something struck that platform with enormous force. And the damage was recent. Whatever the keeper's mental state, the physical evidence suggests that something genuinely unusual was happening to the sea around Eilean Mor. The fourth theory is the one that occupies the darkest corner of this story, and it is the one that the newly discovered documents, if they are genuine, seem to point toward. Localized atmospheric or oceanic anomaly. This is the theory that something real, something physical, something measurable, but something not yet fully understood by science, occurred in the waters immediately surrounding Eilean Mor in December 1900. The Flannan Isles sit above a complex and poorly mapped underwater geological formation. The seabed in that region is characterized by deep trenches, submerged ridges, and volcanic features. Underwater geological activity, submarine landslides, methane hydrate releases, or seismic events, can produce effects on the ocean's surface that would appear bizarre and terrifying to observers. Methane eruptions, for instance, can cause the sea to froth and bubble violently, reducing the buoyancy of water and swallowing anything on its surface. They can also produce sudden changes in atmospheric pressure. Is it possible that a geological event beneath the Flannan Isles produced the unusual wave behavior described in the newly discovered log? Could such an event explain the pressure fluctuations recorded by the barometer, the localized storm that no weather station detected, and the massive wave force that damaged the West Landing? Could it explain why the sea appeared to be breathing? And if so, could a final, catastrophic manifestation of this phenomenon, a sudden, explosive release of gas or a massive submarine landslide, have produced a wave or surge that swept the keepers from the platform? This theory is speculative. There is no direct geological evidence of such an event occurring near the Flannan Isles in December 1900. But the underwater geology of the region has never been comprehensively surveyed, and events of this type leave little surface evidence. It is, in many ways, the theory that best accounts for all the known facts, the physical damage, the weather discrepancy, the keeper's distress, and the new log entry. It is also the theory that is most frightening, because it suggests that the keepers were not victims of bad luck or bad weather. They were witnesses to something rising from beneath them, and they watched it build for days before it finally took them. There is one more detail I want to share with you. One that does not get discussed often enough. In the weeks and months following the disappearance, the replacement keepers assigned to Eileen Moore reported persistent unease. Several requested transfers. One keeper reported hearing voices calling from below the cliffs, voices that seemed to call out the names of the missing men. Another reported that on calm nights, the sea around the West Landing would occasionally exhibit unusual patterns, swells that moved against the wind, ripples in still water. These reports were not officially documented by the Northern Lighthouse Board, which had no interest in encouraging superstitious narratives around its facilities. They survive only in personal letters and later interviews conducted by journalists and historians. The lighthouse was automated in 1971. No keeper has lived on Eileen Moore since. The light still functions, maintained by periodic visits from technicians who arrive by helicopter. The helicopter pilots reportedly prefer not to linger. I have been researching this case for a long time. I have read every available source, the official Board of Trade report, Robert Muirhead's investigation notes, the contemporaneous newspaper coverage, the academic analyses, and now the newly surfaced documents. And I want to tell you what I believe, not because my belief constitutes evidence, but because I think it is important to be honest about where the evidence leads me. I believe the three keepers of Eileen Moore encountered a real, physical phenomenon. I believe the sea around their island did something that they had never seen before, something that their instruments confirmed but their experience could not explain. I believe they watched it, recorded it, and became increasingly terrified by it over the course of several days. I believe that on December 15, 1900, something at the West Landing demanded their attention, all three of them, simultaneously, and that whatever it was urgent enough to override every protocol, every instinct, every rational consideration. Two of them had time to prepare. One did not. The gate was closed, perhaps by the last man out, perhaps by the wind, perhaps by habit so ingrained that even in extremis, the body performs it automatically. And then the sea, which had been behaving strangely for days, took them. But I also believe that we do not fully understand what happened. The weather discrepancy has never been resolved. The nature of the unusual wave behavior has never been identified. The physical forces required to bend iron railings and displace a ton of stone, 70 feet above the waterline, on a day when no storm was recorded, those forces have never been explained. And the barometer. The barometer that fluctuated wildly, that Duckett believed was broken. If it was not broken, if it was faithfully recording what was happening in the atmosphere above Eileen Moore, then what was happening in the atmosphere above Eileen Moore? The Flannan Isles Lighthouse still stands. It still sends its beam across 24 miles of North Atlantic darkness. But nobody lives inside it anymore. Nobody watches the sea from its windows. Nobody records what the waves do on calm nights when the wind drops and the water goes still and something beneath the surface shifts. Thomas Marshall's final log entry, the one in the bound book, the official one, described conditions as calm. The sea was gray. That is the last confirmed observation from inside the lighthouse. But if the loose page is genuine, if there truly was a fourth entry, then Marshall's final words were not about calm seas and gray skies. His final words were about the water breathing. 3 men entered that lighthouse in December 1900. They were competent, experienced, and disciplined. They had protocols for every emergency the sea could throw at them. They had oilskins and lifelines and a lighthouse built to withstand the worst the Atlantic could produce. And something took them anyway. Something that bent iron. Something that moved stone. Something that came from the water on a day when the water should have been calm. Something that 3 men watched build for days, that made one of them cry and all of them pray, that left no bodies, no wreckage, no explanation. The Flannan Isles remain uninhabited. The chapel of St. Flannan still stands in ruin on Eileen Moore. Local fishermen still avoid the islands when they can. And the sea around the west landing platform still, on occasion, according to those who have visited, behaves in ways that are difficult to describe. The official file on the disappearance of Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur has never been closed. The Northern Lighthouse Board's conclusion, death by misadventure at sea, remains the only official determination. No bodies were ever recovered. No definitive cause of death was ever established. The stopped clock, the cold meal, and the missing oilskins remain the only physical evidence of whatever happened in those final hours. And now, if the 2023 discovery holds up to scrutiny, we may have one more piece of evidence. A loose page in a dead man's handwriting. A letter that was never sent. A barometer that was not broken. And a description of the sea that sounds less like a weather observation and more like a warning. The water was breathing. 123 years later, we still do not know what Thomas Marshall meant by that. We do not know what he saw. We do not know what came for them on that gray December day. But I think they knew. In the end, standing on that west landing platform, watching the sea rise and fall in patterns that should not have existed, I think they understood that they were looking at something that did not belong in their world. Something ancient. Something geological, or atmospheric, or something for which we do not yet have a word. And I think the sea took them not because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but because they saw what it was doing. Because they were watching. Because they were the only witnesses to something that, perhaps, was never meant to be witnessed. The lighthouse is automated now. The beam turns on its own. The logbook is empty. And whatever happens on the west landing platform of Eilean Mor on calm December nights when the barometric pressure drops without reason and the waves move against the wind, whatever happens out there in the dark, on that rock, in that ancient and empty place, happens without witnesses. Maybe that is how it prefers it. Or maybe, somewhere in the archives, in a misfiled box in a dusty collection that no one has opened in a century, there are more pages. More entries. More observations from men who watched the sea do impossible things and tried, in their careful, professional way, to write down what they saw before the water took them too. If those pages exist, I wonder what they say. I wonder if the handwriting stays steady to the end. I wonder if the final words are clinical and measured, the way a keeper's log should be. Or if, at some point, the professionalism breaks down. The training fails. And what is left on the page is not an observation but a confession of fear. Not a record but a prayer. Not a report but a final, desperate attempt to make someone, anyone, understand what it is like to stand on a rock in the North Atlantic and watch the ocean stop behaving like an ocean. The water was breathing. What do you think really happened on Eilean Mor? Was it a rogue wave? A geological event? A shared psychological breakdown? Or was it something we still do not have a name for, something that the keepers tried to describe and could only call breathing? Leave your theory below. Because after 123 years, the lighthouse is still dark on the inside. And the question is still open. What took the keepers of Eilean Mor?